Hi everybody, I'm Dennis. Welcome back to the bindery. We won't be staying here for very long though, because first I want to take you on a little trip. If you don't recognize where we are, then you should know that today I've brought you to Scotland. This past summer, the Four Keys clan and I came here to take in all the scenery, history, and beauty that this amazing country has to offer. Oh, and castles too. Did I mention that Scotland has a lot of castles? It's true. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Scotland's great and all, Dennis, but I thought this was a bookbinding video. Just exactly why are we in Scotland? Well, I'll have you know that there are a lot of books in Scotland. In every town and city I visited, I just had to have a peek in every used bookshop I found. And there were more than a few of them. I was looking for more than just some reading for the plane ride home. I wanted to find something old, interesting, but more importantly, something that needed rescuing. A book I could bring back home and hopefully bring back to life. And so I searched, and eventually I found myself at Armchair Books in Edinburgh, where I found more than I could have wished for. Here was a treasure trove for a bibliophile like me. Their shelves stocked with centuries of books in every style of binding and in every state of repair. I had a hard time narrowing down my choices. Eventually, I found this one, which seemed to fit the bill. And at 130 years old, it was definitely in need of help. Yet not beyond hope. This was the one.
Interesting. Thank you. And do you need a copy of your receipt?
Yes, I will take a copy.
With my mission accomplished and my trip at an end, it was time to pack everything up and jet back to Canada, where the real work was yet to begin. Autumn is closing in now on my little bindery, but it's warm inside, so let's go in and have a look at this book. So here it is. There's really not very much left of it to look at, just this one plain red cloth cover. The back cover is long gone, with just this one lonely tape left to show how it was attached. The spine's missing too, and with it any titling that may have once been there. But that lets me get a good look at the structure underneath, which seems to be just some craft paper over a lining of mull. No surprises there. This dirty and ragged bottom edge shows that this book was obviously never trimmed, so that'll be something to consider. There's no evidence of any end bands, either at the tail or up here at the head of the book. Let's have a look inside. It would seem that this was once a library book. I hope it's not overdue. And there's an inscription too. For French work, Midsummer 1894. That's pretty cool. And now we get to the book itself, and it seems to be a literary analysis of Tennyson. I did a bit of research on the author, Stopford Augustus Brooke, and it seems he was a person of some note at the time. He was a contemporary of Tennyson himself, and who was royal chaplain to Queen Victoria. He also led the effort to preserve William Wordsworth's home for posterity, so it seems like he took his poetry pretty seriously. As for the book itself, it looks to be in pretty good shape inside. I'm not seeing any significant stains, tears, annotations, anything like that. So that means it's time for me to get to work. I'll start by removing the old cover. Without the rest of the binding, there's no point saving it. I'll just have to make a new one. I will use it to protect the text block though, with another piece of grey board for the other side. Those will keep the book safe while I get it into the laying press so I can get to work on the spine. Because 2 of the 3 original tapes are missing, I'll need to get down to the internal structure to see how to replace them. That means first removing all of the backing material. This brown craft paper is flaking away in places, but not so much that I can peel it away entirely, so I'll need another approach. This clear goo is methyl cellulose, which itself is a weak adhesive, but in this case I'll use the moisture in it to reverse the old water-soluble glue. I'll let it sit under some plastic to do its work, while I go make a cup of tea. The methyl cell has done its job and softened up the old adhesive, allowing me to remove the thin layer of paper. It's a messy job, but not a difficult one. After that, I start work on the mull, and I reapply the methyl cell as needed. I don't want to use too much or let it soak in too long, as that could damage the pages. After that, I do a final cleanup to get the last of the old adhesive out from between the signatures. So finally, I've got the spine cleaned off, but I'm not sure I like what I found. For one thing, the old tapes have been stitched in place with this zigzag pattern, which is not what I was expecting. If the sewing had gone around the tapes rather than through them, I might have been able to pull the old ones out and replace them, but as it stands, that won't be possible. Furthermore, the kettle stitches here at the head are really close to the edge, too close for me to trim the book without risking damaging the sewing. All that taken together, I think my best option is to fully disassemble the book and then re-sew it onto new tapes. To reduce damaging the signatures more than necessary, I'll position the tapes alongside the original sewing and reuse some of the original holes. Before taking anything apart, I'll mark where I need to pierce the new sewing holes. I mark the locations for the new kettle stitches as well, leaving space for trimming. I'll also add a diagonal reference line as a visual aid to keep all the signatures in the right sequence and orientation. I'll then transfer those marks onto a paper template that I'll use later when I need to pierce the signatures. And I'll mark an H at one end to tell me which end is at the head of the book. I'll now begin to carefully remove the sewing. As I do so, I not only take care to not damage the paper, but I make note of the unique sewing structure as well. It just goes to show that there are countless ways to bind a book, and who's to say which one is the best? In this case, it was the tapes that failed after all, not the sewing. With the stitches out, there's still a bit of glue on the first signature, so a little more methyl cell dabbed on the spine loosens that up. After getting that first one separated, I decided that working spine up would be more sensible, so my pair of bricks make for a quick and sturdy hold. I then have a clear view to continue cutting the stitches and removing the tapes. With all the stitching cut and the tapes removed, I can focus on separating the signatures. Again, I apply a little more methyl cell to loosen things up. Eventually I fall into a rhythm, carefully working one signature at a time until I have the entire book disassembled, or pulled as it's called in the trade. Before I can move on to resewing, I've got some more prep to do. I'll first need to do some more cleanup on these signatures to remove any little crusts of glue, bits of thread, and so on. Overall though, the book came up pretty well and this didn't take too long. Next, I need to remove the creases along the spine edges of the signatures. These are the remnants of the shoulders of the book, and would be troublesome if I left them as they are. This process is called knocking out, or sometimes knocking down, which sounds more violent than it actually is. Using a hammer and a metal plate, also called a knocking down iron, I gently but firmly tap along the entire spine edge of each signature. This flattens out that old curl, leaving the signatures ready for the next step, which is to do some repairs. The type of repair I'll be doing is called guarding. To do this, I'll be using this Japanese kozo paper. It's very thin, but because of its long fibers, it's extremely strong, so it's perfect for guarding. I'll score the paper with a ruler and my awl, then tear away strips about a ½ inch wide. By tearing the strips, it creates a slightly fuzzy feathered edge, which will blend better with the old pages. This book has 23 signatures, so I'll need at least that many guards, and maybe a few extras, just in case. To attach the guards, I'm using wheat starch paste. This is an archival and reversible adhesive, so it's ideal for this application. Working on some waste paper, I lay out my guard and brush on a layer of paste. The paste is slow to dry, so I don't need to rush as I transfer the guard onto the bench and lay a signature on it, lining it up with the middle of the guard. Then, with a piece of folded parchment paper for support, I wrap the guard around the spine edge of the signature. This technique allows for accurate and controlled placement of the guard. I press it in place with my bone folder, then I add a folded piece of blotting paper to absorb any excess moisture. Then it goes between boards and under some weight while I move on to the next one. After a few of these, I decided that the folded blotters weren't doing it for me, so instead I alternated the signatures in a stack with sheets of blotting paper in between. This worked much better, and again, I was able to settle into a quiet rhythm of paper and paste. After about an hour or so under a light weight, the guards are dry enough to trim. I'm just doing this by eye, as the book itself will get trimmed to size later. For now, I just want to get the little overhanging bits out of the way. With that done, you can really see the difference that the guarding makes. The signatures are tidy and strong, and they're ready for sewing. Before I break out needle and thread though, I want to make up some end papers. I'll be using this bouquet pattern marbled paper that I made, which I think will really complement the book. With those cut to size, I'll break out the beeswax in my agate burnisher. I apply a sparing amount of wax with a cotton cloth, then go over the entire surface multiple times with the burnisher. I used to do this with a much smaller burnisher, but this large 4-inch one is a real time saver. Burnishing intensifies the colors of the pattern and gives the paper a smooth, lustrous surface. It's a deeply satisfying process, and one that is entirely period appropriate for our book as well, which I like. Here you can see the difference between before and after. For the plain portions of the end papers, I'll be using this machine-made laid paper. Laid means that you can see the chain lines in it from the manufacturing process, and this paper is a very near match to the pages of the book. I'll break down these large sheets by folding them and then slitting them with my paper knife. I'll need 4 pieces in total to complete the end papers. With the materials in hand, I'll prepare both the marbled papers and all 4 of the white sheets by folding them in half, then creasing them well with my bone folder. And I should say that all of these have the grain oriented in the short direction, which is to say parallel to the spine of the book. I take a moment to sort out the front and back marbled sheets, then glue out one of the white sheets using a mix of PVA glue and methyl cellulose. Adding the methyl cell into the PVA extends the working time of the adhesive without compromising on its strength. I then attach one of the marbled sheets, taking care to align both papers at the folds. I firmly press the two together before slipping in a sandwich of release paper and blotting paper. Then I get it between boards and into the press. I repeat that process with the other end paper, and when ready I add the other one into the press as well and screw them both down firmly to set up. An hour or so later, I come back to finish off the end paper construction. I'll take a peek to make sure they're looking as they should, but I don't fully unpack these at this stage, as they'll be going back into the press soon. I just need to tip on an extra white sheet to each one with a thin strip of the same adhesive that I used earlier. Then it's back into the press for at least a day to allow these to dry completely. It's the next day and the end papers are ready to come out. They've turned out extremely well, nice and flat, without any curling. The final step is to form what's called the waste sheet. I do this by folding one leaf of the second white sheet to the outside of the end paper. The waste sheets help protect the book through the binding process and are sometimes torn out at the end, but for this book they're going to form an important structural element. For now, I'll just mark the front and back of each one, and these two are now ready for binding. In order to sew the book, I first need to pre-punch the sewing holes in all the signatures. To do this, I'll use my punching cradle and awl, as well as the template I made earlier in the video. I carefully pierce the new sewing holes at each of my marks, being sure to keep the template and signature aligned to the top of the cradle on my right. The guards have closed up the original sewing holes, so I'll take the time to re-pierce those as well. As I work my way through the book, I make sure to keep all the signatures in the correct order. The end papers will be sewn into the book as well, so I pierce those too, being careful not to go through the marbled paper. To do that, I hold the awl at a slight angle as I pierce the holes. A sewing frame is a handy tool that holds the linen tapes in place while I sew the book. To attach the tapes, I wrap the ends around these brass keys. Those get slipped through the slot in the base of the frame and are then held in place by tension alone, no knots. It's a surprisingly effective method. I then cut each tape to the level of the crossbar. The loops on the crossbar serve as attachment points. A single pin passed through both is more than strong enough to hold each tape in place. Then, by turning the knobs on the posts, I can raise the crossbar, applying tension to the tapes to keep them straight and secure. Finally, I'll adjust the spacing to match my template, and it's time to start sewing. With a piece of wood underneath to raise the work up a little bit, I begin with the back end paper. I'm using an 18-3 linen thread that I've coated with beeswax and attached to a bookbinder's needle. I've spoken about sewing quite a bit in my other videos, and I will again as I continue my bookbinding basics series, so I won't belabor the process here with too much commentary. I will point out though that unlike in the original binding, I'm taking pains to not sew through the tapes. The reason why I'm doing that will become plain in the next video. But as a nod to that original zigzag stitching, I'm going to use a link stitch here to help tie everything together. As I secure the second signature to the first with a square knot, I can hear the music coming in, so that means it's time to roll the sewing montage. Enjoy. Well, that was a lot of work to essentially get back to where I started, but it was well worth it. The book now has some nice strong tapes for attaching the covers, the spine is well protected, and it's got some fancy end papers to dress it up. And it looks like I got all the pages in the right order as well, which is always a relief to see. In the next video, I'll continue this book's rehabilitation with a 130-year overdue haircut, a bit of gentle spine adjustment, the addition of some functional but handsome end bands, and then finally getting it back between some cover boards. I hope you'll join me for that, so until then, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching.